Jake Morrison looked up at the massive alien standing in front of him. The creature was at least 8 feet tall, with dark green skin that looked like armor plating. Its forearms ended in claws that could probably cut through steel. Commander Zektar of the Kithara warrior race, and Jake was supposed to serve under him. "So this is the human they sent us," Zektar said in his deep, rumbling voice. His yellow eyes looked Jake up and down with obvious disappointment. "You are smaller than I expected." Jake stood as straight as he could, but he barely reached the alien's chest. At 5 feet 6 inches, he was considered average height for a human. But on this ship full of Kithara warriors, he felt like a child among giants. "Yes, sir," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Lieutenant Jake Morrison reporting for duty. The other Kithara in the room made clicking sounds with their mouths. Jake had learned enough of their language to know they were laughing. At him, one of them, a younger warrior named Velkin, stepped forward. "Commander, surely this is a mistake," Velkin said. "This soft little creature cannot possibly serve alongside true warriors. Look at him. Would not last 5 minutes in. Real combat." Jake felt his face turn red, but he kept quiet. He had been through worse than this during his training on Earth. The military had taught him to take insults and keep moving forward. "The Galactic Defense Coalition requires us to accept human crew members," Zektar said with a sigh. "We have no choice in this matter." He looked down at Jake again. "You will be assigned to maintenance duties. Try not to get in our way." Jake's heart sank. He had trained for 3 years to serve on an alien ship. He had studied Kithara culture, learned their language, and passed all the physical tests. Now he was being treated like unwanted cargo. "Sir, I was trained for tactical operations," Jake said carefully. "My scores were in the top 10% of my class." Velkin laughed out loud. "Tactical operations? You cannot even reach our weapon systems without standing on a box." This was true. Jake had already noticed that everything on the ship was built for beings much larger than humans. The control panels were too high, the doors were too wide, and the corridors were built for creatures with longer legs. "Show him to his quarters," Zektar ordered, "and find him some work that suits his size." A human woman stepped forward from the back of the room. She was tall for a human, almost 6 feet, with short brown hair and tired eyes. This was Communications Officer Lisa Park, one of only 3 humans on the ship. "Come on, Jake," she said. "Quietly. Let me show you around." Jake followed Lisa through the ship's corridors. The walls were made of some kind of metal that glowed with a soft blue light. Everything was huge. The doorways were twice as wide as they needed to be for humans. The ceilings were so high that Jake felt like he was walking through a cathedral. "Don't let them get to you," Lisa said as they walked. "The Kithara respect strength above all else. They judge everyone by how well they can fight." "But I can fight," Jake protested. "I scored high in all my combat training." "Human combat training," Lisa said with a sad smile. "These aliens have been warriors for thousands of years. They've conquered dozens of worlds. To them, we're just weak mammals who got lucky with technology." They stopped at a door that was smaller than the others, though still large for human standards. Lisa pressed her hand against a panel, and the door slid open. "This is your room," she said. "You'll be sharing it with me and Tony Martinez. He's the other human on the crew. He's working in the engine room right now." The room was basic, but clean. It had 3 beds built into the walls, a small table, and a tiny bathroom. Everything was sized for humans, which made Jake feel a little better. "Why are we here?" Jake asked, sitting on one of the beds. "I mean, if they don't want us, why did they accept humans at all?" Lisa sat across from him. "Politics," she said. "The Galactic Defense Coalition is trying to bring all the races together. Humans are new to the galaxy, but our technology is useful. So they made rules that all ships have to have mixed crews, but the Kithara don't like it." "The Kithara don't like anything that isn't about fighting and honor," Lisa said. "They've been the top warriors in the galaxy for so long that they can't imagine anyone else being useful in combat." Jake lay back on his bed and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't what he had dreamed of when he signed up for interstellar service. He had imagined himself as part of a team, working together with aliens to protect the galaxy. Instead, He was stuck on a ship where nobody respected him. "Jake," Lisa said gently, "I know this is hard, but you need to understand something. Kythera aren't evil, they're just different. In their culture, if you can't fight, you're not worth much. It's not personal." "It feels personal," Jake muttered. Over the next few days, Jake tried to find his place on the ship. He was assigned to maintenance work, cleaning systems and checking equipment. It was boring work, but at least it kept him busy. The worst part was mealtime. The ship's dining hall was a large room with tables built for Kythera. Jake had to sit on a chair that was too big for him, at a table that came up to his chest. How the other humans usually sat together, but Jake could see the Kythera watching them and making their clicking laugh sounds. "The little human needs a booster." "Seat," one of them said in their language. Jake pretended not to understand, but the words stung. Tony Martinez was a friendly guy who worked in the engine room. He was bigger than Jake, about 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, but even he looked small next to the Kythera. "You just have to ignore them," Tony said one evening as they ate dinner. "I've been here for 6 months, and they still treat me like I'm invisible, but at least they don't actively mock me anymore." "How do you deal with it?" Jake asked. "I focus on my work," Tony said. "I'm good with engines. Really good. Sometimes they even ask for my help with complicated repairs. It's not much, but it's something." Jake nodded, but he wasn't satisfied with just being ignored. He had come here to prove that humans belonged in the galaxy, not to hide in the background doing maintenance work. The ship's mission was to patrol the outer regions of Kythera space, looking for threats and protecting colonies. Jake learned that the Kythera had many enemies. There were pirates, hostile alien races, and creatures that hunted sentient beings for food. "The Kythera are the best fighters in the galaxy," Lisa explained one day. "But they're not the only dangerous things. Out here, there are species that even they fear." Jake spent his free time studying the ship's database, learning about the different threats they might face. He read about the Zelthic, shapeshifters that could look like anyone. He studied the Void Hunters, creatures that lived in empty space and attacked ships. He learned about dozens of alien species, some friendly, some neutral, and some that would kill any living thing they encountered. The more he learned, the more he realized how dangerous this job really was. The Kythera might be giants, but they faced enemies that could challenge even them. And if something happened to the ship, Jake would need to be ready to fight. Whether the Kythera respected him or not, late at night, when the ship was quiet, Jake would practice in the small gym that had been set up for the human crew. He worked on his fighting skills, his flexibility, and his endurance. He couldn't make himself bigger, but he could make himself better. He had no idea that soon he would get a chance to prove what humans were really capable of. 3 weeks had passed since Jake arrived on the Starforge. He had settled into a routine of maintenance work and quiet meals with the other humans. The Kythera crew still ignored him most of the time, which was better than being mocked, but not by much. Jake was cleaning air filters in one of the lower decks when the ship's alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed in the corridors. He could hear the heavy footsteps of Kythera warriors running to their battle stations. "All crew to emergency stations," came Commander Zektar's voice over the ship's communication system. "We have received a priority distress signal." Jake dropped his cleaning tools and ran toward the command center. He knew he wasn't supposed to be there during emergencies, but his curiosity got the better of him. He pressed himself against the wall outside the command center and listened. "The signal is coming from Mining Colony 7, reported the ship's sensor officer. "They say they are under attack." "What kind of attack?" Zektar demanded. "Unknown, sir." The signal was cut off before they could give details. Jake heard the commander's claws clicking against the metal floor. This was a sound that Kythera made when they were thinking hard about something. "Set course for Mining Colony 7. Maximum speed," Zektar ordered. "All warriors prepare for combat." The ship changed direction, and Jake felt the artificial gravity shift as they accelerated. He made his way back to the human quarters, where he found Lisa and Tony waiting. "Did you hear what's happening?" Tony asked. "Some kind of attack on a mining colony," Jake said. The commander sounded worried. Lisa looked concerned. If something worries the Cathara, it must be really bad. They're not afraid of much. Journey to Mining Colony 7 took 18 hours. During that time, Jake noticed that the Cathara warriors were more tense than usual. They checked their weapons multiple times and spoke in low voices about things they had fought before. Jake spent the time reading everything he could find about Mining Colony 7. It was a small settlement on the edge of Kitharus space, where different alien species worked together to mine rare minerals. About 300 people lived there, including families with children. When they finally arrived at the colony, Jake could see why the Cathara were worried. The settlement was dark. No light showed in the buildings, and there were no ships moving around the landing area. Commander Zektar assembled his entire crew in the main briefing room. Even the humans were included this time, though they had to stand at the back where they could barely see over the tall Cathara.
Oh.
Sensors show no life signs in the main colony buildings, Zektar announced. However, we are detecting movement in the underground cave system beneath the settlement. Holographic map appeared in the center of the room, showing the colony and the extensive cave network below it. The caves went deep into the planet's crust, with dozens of tunnels branching in all directions. "Sir," said Subcommander Velkin, "what kind of enemy are we facing?" Zektar's expression grew dark. "Based on the evidence, we believe this is the work of Zelthic." The room fell silent. Jake had read about the Zelthic in the ship's database. They were shapeshifters who could take the form of any living creature they had consumed. They were also cannibals who preferred to hunt intelligent species. "Zelthic are cowards," one of the warriors said. "They prefer to hide and ambush their prey." "Yes," Zektar agreed. "Which explains why they have taken refuge in the caves. They have probably consumed most of the colonists and are now using the cave system as their hunting ground." Jake felt sick to his stomach. 300 people, including children, had been killed and eaten by these monsters. "We will deploy in full battle formation," Zektar continued. "Search teams will sweep the caves and eliminate any Zelthic we find." But then the sensor officer spoke up with bad news. "Commander, I'm detecting life signs deeper in the cave system. Small ones. They appear to be juveniles of various species." "Children," Lisa whispered behind Jake. "Some of the children are still alive." Zektar studied the holographic map more carefully. "The tunnels are narrow," he said slowly. "Too narrow. For full combat gear, this was a problem." The Kithare were large warriors who fought with heavy weapons and thick armor. In the tight confines of the cave tunnels, they would be at a severe disadvantage. Velkin stepped forward. "Sir, we could use explosives to widen the tunnels." "No," Zektar replied firmly. "The explosions might cause cave-ins. The younglings could be killed." Jake studied the holographic map from his position at the back of the room. The cave system was like a maze with tunnels that branched and connected in complex patterns. Some of the passages were so narrow that even a human would have to crawl through them. The Cathara warriors looked at each other uncertainly. This was not the kind of fight they were trained for. They were used to open combat where their size and strength gave them clear advantages. "Perhaps we could send smaller warriors," suggested one of the officers. "Our youngest fighters might be able to fit through the tunnels." "Even our smallest warriors are too large for many of these passages," Zektar said. He stared at the map for a long moment, and Jake could see the frustration in his yellow eyes. That's when Jake realized something. The caves were too small for Cathara, but they weren't too small for humans. In fact, a human might be able to move through the tunnel system more easily than any other warrior on the ship. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Commander," he said in a voice that was louder than he intended. The entire room turned to look at him. Dozens of yellow Cathara eyes focused on the small human who had dared to speak during a military briefing. "What did you say?" Zektar asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Jake's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to continue. "Sir, I could go into the caves. I'm small enough to fit through the tunnels." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Velkin started. Laughing, "The little human wants to play warrior," he said mockingly. "This is not a game, soft creature. The Zelthic would tear you apart in seconds." "You have no combat experience," another warrior added. "You have never faced a real enemy." Jake felt his face burning with embarrassment, but he didn't back down. "I know I'm not a warrior like you," he said, "but those children are going to die unless someone goes down there. And I'm the only one small enough to reach them." "This is foolishness," Velkin declared. Sending this weak human into the caves would be the same as murdering him. But Commander Zektar was studying Jake with new interest. "What makes you think you could survive against the Zelthic?" he asked. Jake had been thinking about this since he heard about the shapeshifters. "Zelthic rely on deception and ambush tactics," he said. "They're not used to fighting enemies who expect them. And in narrow tunnels, size and strength matter less than speed and intelligence." "You would go alone?" Zektar asked. "I would go first," Jake corrected. "Could find the children and mark safe paths for your warriors to follow." The room erupted in clicking sounds as the Cathara discussed this idea. Most of them seemed to think it was ridiculous. A few looked thoughtful. Lisa stepped forward from the back of the room. "Commander Jake has been studying the tactical database for weeks. He knows more about Zelthic hunting patterns than anyone except your senior officers." Tony nodded in agreement. "He's been training every day since he got here. He's tougher than he looks." Zektar walked over to Jake and looked down at him. The human barely came up to the alien's chest, but something in Jake's eyes seemed to impress the commander. "Zelthic in those caves have killed 300 colonists," Zektar said quietly. "They are experienced hunters who know that cave system perfectly. What makes you think you can succeed where trained warriors would fail?" Jake met the commander's gaze steadily. "'Cause they won't expect me," he said. "They've been hunting larger prey. They don't know how humans fight." Zektar was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare light equipment for the human. Basic tools only." Sir Velkin protested. "This is madness. You're sending him to his death." Perhaps Zektar agreed. "But the younglings will die anyway if we do nothing." And maybe he looked down at Jake again. "Maybe we will learn something about what humans are truly capable of." Jake felt a mixture of fear and excitement. He was about to face the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, armed with nothing but basic equipment and his wits. But for the first time since arriving on the ship, he felt like he had a real purpose. The hunt was about to begin. Jake stood at the entrance to the cave system, checking his equipment one last time. The Cathara weapons officer had given him a small knife, a handheld light, and an emergency beacon that would let the ship track his location. It wasn't much, but it was all he could carry in the narrow tunnels. "Member Commander," Zektar said, "your mission is to find the younglings and mark safe paths. Do not engage the Zelthic unless you have no choice." Jake nodded, though he suspected that choice might be taken away from him quickly. The cave entrance was a dark hole in the ground, barely wide enough for him to fit through. He could smell something bad coming from inside, like rotting meat. "The beacon will work for about 6 hours, the communications officer explained. "After that, the cave walls will block the signal." 6 hours, Jake repeated. "Got it." Lisa grabbed his arm. Before he could start down, "Be careful," she said quietly. "Come back to us." Jake managed to smile. "I'll try." He turned on his light and lowered himself into the cave. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, and he had to use his hands and feet to keep from sliding too fast. Behind him, he could hear the worried voices of the Cathara crew. But soon the tunnel curved, and their voices faded away. The cave was colder than he expected. His breath made small clouds in the beam of his light. The walls were rough stone, carved by water over thousands of years. In some places, the tunnel was wide enough for him to walk upright. In others, he had to crawl on his hands and knees. After 10 minutes of careful movement, Jake came to his first junction. 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. He consulted the map he had memorized, trying to figure out which way to go. The life signs had been detected deeper in the cave system, but there were many possible paths. That's when he heard a sound like crying, very faint, coming from the middle tunnel. Jake turned off his light and listened carefully. Yes, there it was again. A child's voice, scared and alone, but something bothered him about the sound. It was too perfect, too much like what he would expect to hear. Jake had read about Zelthic hunting tactics. They were excellent mimics who could copy any sound they had heard before. Jake kept his light off and moved carefully toward the sound. As he got closer, he could make out words. "Help me," the voice said. "Please help me. I'm scared." The voice was coming from a small chamber just ahead. Jake crept forward until he could peer around the corner. In the darkness, he could see a small shape huddled against the far wall. It looked like a young alien child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. But Jake noticed something wrong. The child wasn't breathing. He could see no movement in the chest, no clouds of breath in the cold air, and the smell of rotting meat was stronger here. "Help me," the voice said again. "I've been hiding here for so long." Jake gripped his knife tighter. This was definitely a Zelthic, probably one that had consumed a real child and was now using its form to lure other victims. The creature was waiting for him to come closer, to drop his guard. Instead, Jake did something the Zelthic didn't expect. He turned his light on full brightness and aimed it directly at the fake child. The creature screamed and tried to shield its eyes. In the harsh light, Jake could see its true form flickering like a bad video. One moment it looked like a child. The next it was something with too many teeth and claws that scraped against the stone floor. The Zelthic lunged at him. It was moving faster than anything had a right to move. But Jake was ready. He rolled to the side and slashed with his knife as the creature passed by him. The blade cut deep into its flank and it screamed again. "You're not supposed to be here," the Zelthic snarled, its voice changing from the child's scared whisper to something deep and angry. "This is our hunting ground." "Not anymore," Jake said, surprised by how calm he sounded. The creature circled him in the small chamber, looking for another chance to attack. But Jake had learned something important. The Zelthic was fast and strong, but it was used to hunting terrified victims who ran in panic. It wasn't used to someone who fought back with a plan. Jake used his light like a weapon, flashing it in the creature's eyes every time it tried to attack. Each time the Zelthic was blinded, Jake moved to a new position. Finally, he managed to get behind it and drive his knife deep into its back. The Zelthic collapsed and didn't move again. Jake checked the creature to make sure it was dead, then searched the chamber. He found bones scattered in the corners, the remains of the real child the Zelthic had consumed. Jake said a quiet prayer for the young victim, then moved on. He had learned something valuable from this first encounter. The Zelthic were dangerous, but they had weaknesses. They relied on darkness and surprise. They expected their victims to be afraid and confused. Jake could use these facts against them. The tunnel system continued deeper into the planet. Jake found more evidence of the Zelthic's hunting. There were drag marks on the floor where bodies had been pulled deeper into the caves. He also found pieces of mining equipment and personal belongings scattered throughout the tunnels. But he also found something else. In one of the wider chambers, he discovered scratch marks on the walls. They looked like they had been made by young claws, and they seemed to form a pattern. Jake studied them carefully and realized they were arrows, pointing toward one of the tunnel entrances. Someone was leaving a trail. Surviving children were trying to mark their path through the cave system. Jake followed the scratch marks through a series of increasingly narrow tunnels. Sometimes he had to crawl on his belly to fit through the spaces. He was grateful for his small size now, something he had never thought he would feel. The marks led him to another junction, where he could hear sounds of movement ahead. But these sounds were different from the fake crying he had heard before. These were the real sounds of frightened children trying to stay quiet. Jake approached carefully, not wanting to scare them. He could see a faint glow ahead, like the light from a small fire. As he got closer, he could make out voices whispering in different alien languages. "Hello?" he called softly. "I'm here to help you." The voices stopped immediately. Jake waited, then tried again. "My name is Jake. I'm from the ship Starforge. We received your distress call." After a long pause, a young voice answered, "Are you real? Or are you one of them?" Jake understood the question. The children had probably been tricked by Zelthic mimics before. "I'm real," Jake said. "How can I prove it to you?" "Tell us something only a rescuer would know," the voice said. It sounded like a young female, maybe 12 years old. Jake thought for a moment. "The Starforge is a Cathara ship. Commander Zektar sent me down here because I'm small enough to fit through the tunnels. The Cathara warriors are too big to come down here themselves." He heard whispered discussions. Then the voice spoke again. "Okay, you can come closer, but move slowly." Jake rounded the corner and found himself in a natural chamber about the size of a small room. 7 children of different alien species were huddled around a tiny fire made from pieces of wood and cloth. They looked terrified and hungry, but they were alive. The oldest was a Cathara female. Unusual because Cathara children were normally much larger than these tunnels would allow. She must have been very young to fit through the passages. The others included what looked like 2 human children. A young creature with blue skin and large eyes, and 3 aliens Jake didn't recognize. "How long have you been hiding here?" "Asked 3 days, the young Cathara said. "Maybe 4. It's hard to tell time in the dark." "Are there any adults with you?" "No," she said sadly. "The monsters got all the adults first. We ran into the caves when the attack started." Jake looked around the chamber. It was defensible, with only 2 entrances, but it was also a trap. "The Zelthic found them here. There would be nowhere to run." "We need to get out of here," Jake said. "I know the way back to the surface." "We can't," one of the human children said. "There are more of those things between here and the way out. We've seen them hunting in the tunnels." Jake nodded. He had expected this. The Zelthic would be patrolling the cave system, looking for exactly what they had found. Getting 7 children safely through the tunnels would be almost impossible, unless he could find a way to hunt the hunters first. "Listen carefully," Jake said to the children. "I'm going to make sure the path is safe. I want you to stay here, and keep quiet until I come back." "Don't leave us," the young Cathara pleaded. "I'm not leaving," Jake promised. "I'm going to clear the way home. But I need you to trust me and stay hidden." He checked his equipment and prepared to venture back. Into the tunnels? Somewhere in the darkness, more Zelthic were waiting. But Jake was no longer the scared maintenance worker who had entered the caves. He was becoming something else, something the monsters weren't prepared for. The hunt was about to turn around. Jake left the children in their hiding place and moved back into the dark tunnels. His light was dimmed to its lowest setting, just enough to keep him from walking into walls. He had learned that the Zelthic could see in the dark much better than humans, but they were sensitive to bright light. This gave him an advantage if he used it correctly. The cave system was like a 3-dimensional maze. Tunnels branched off in every direction, some going up, others going down. Water dripped from the ceiling in many places, creating small pools on the floor. Jake used these sounds to mask his own movement as he stalked through the passages. He was looking for more Zelthic, but he was also learning the cave system. Every junction, every chamber, every narrow passage was being mapped in his mind. Needed to know this place better than the creatures that lived here if he was going to get the children out alive. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Jake found what he was looking for. In a chamber not far from where the children were. Hiding, to Zelthic were having a conversation, or in their true forms, which looked like crosses between giant spiders and wolves. Their many eyes glowed in the darkness as they talked. "The little ones are close," one of them said in a hissing voice. "I can smell their fear." "We should have found them by now," the other replied. "They cannot have gone far." "Patience, brother. Fear makes the meat taste better. Let them think they are safe for a little longer." Jake listened to their conversation and felt anger burning in his chest. These creatures were playing with the children, letting them suffer before they died. They thought this was a game. Jake studied the chamber layout. There were 3 ways in or out, and the Zelthic were positioned so they could watch 2 of them. But there was a 3rd entrance that they couldn't see from where they sat. It was a narrow crack in the wall, barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through. Jake made his way around to the hidden entrance. It took him 15 minutes to work his way through the narrow passage, moving inch by inch to avoid making noise. When he finally reached the other end, he was directly behind the 2 Zelthic. He waited and listened. The creatures were still talking about how they would hunt the children. They described in detail what they planned to do to each one. Jake's anger grew stronger with every word. When the moment was right, Jake struck. He burst from the narrow passage with his light on full brightness, shining it directly into the eyes of the nearest Zelthic. The creature screamed and threw its clawed hands up to protect its vision. Jake's knife found its throat before it could recover. The second Zelthic spun around, but it was confused by the sudden light and the death of its companion. Jake was already moving, rolling across the chamber floor to avoid its claws. When he came up, he was behind the creature again. This Zelthic was smarter than the first. It didn't try to look directly at Jake's light. Instead, it used its other senses to track him. Its nose twitched as it followed his scent, and its ears swiveled to catch every sound he made. Jake realized he was dealing with an experienced hunter. This creature had probably killed dozens of sentient beings over the years. It knew how to fight enemies who fought back. But Jake had something the Zelthic didn't expect. He had grown up in one of the roughest neighborhoods on Earth, where survival meant understanding how predators thought. Street gangs, drug dealers, violent criminals, they all used fear and intimidation the same way the Zelthic did, and Jake had learned how to deal with predators. He turned off his light completely, plunging the chamber into darkness. The Zelthic made a sound of satisfaction, thinking it now had the advantage. It began to stalk toward where it had last seen Jake, but Jake wasn't there anymore. He had moved the moment the light went out, using skills he had learned as a child. When hiding from much more dangerous things than alien monsters, he controlled his breathing, moved without making sound, and waited for the perfect moment. The Zelthic was confused when it couldn't find him. It began to make clicking sounds, trying to use echolocation like a bat. But Jake was ready for this. 2. Every time the creature made a sound, Jake moved a little bit, staying just out of reach. The hunt continued in complete darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The Zelthic became more and more frustrated as it failed to find its prey. It started making mistakes, moving too fast, and bumping into walls. Finally, Jake saw his chance. The creature had backed itself into a corner, still clicking and searching. Jake approached from the side, moving slowly and carefully. When he was close enough, he struck. But this time something was different. Jake didn't just stab with his knife and hope for the best. His movements were precise, calculated, deadly. He found the exact spot where the creature's spine met its skull, and his blade went in perfectly. The Zelthic died without making a sound. Jake stood over the dead creature, breathing hard. Something had changed inside him during that fight. He felt different, more focused, more dangerous. The scared maintenance worker who had entered these caves was gone, replaced by something else. He checked his equipment and moved on. There were more Zelthic in the cave system, and he was going to find them all. Over the next 2 hours, Jake systematically hunted down every Zelthic he could find. Some he took by surprise, using light to blind them before attacking. Others he stalked in the darkness, turning their own hunting methods against them. With each kill, he became more confident, more efficient. The caves that had been the Zelthoc's hunting ground became Jake's hunting ground. He used the tunnel system like a weapon, leading creatures into narrow spaces where their size worked against them. He used the sound of dripping water to mask his approach, even used the creatures' own fear against them, making sounds that drew them into carefully prepared ambushes. By the time he was finished, Jake had killed 8. The creatures that had terrorized an entire mining colony were now dead, eliminated by a single human who weighed less than any one of them. But the most important change wasn't in what Jake had done. It was in how he had done it. Somewhere in the dark tunnels, the frightened young man had discovered something about himself that he never knew existed. He had found the predator that lived inside every human, the thing that had allowed his species to become the dominant life form on Earth. When Jake returned to the children's hiding place, they could sense the change in him immediately. He moved differently now, more quietly, more purposefully. His eyes scanned the chamber constantly, checking for threats. Even his voice was different when he spoke. "The path is clear," he told them. We can go home now. The young Cathara stared at him with wide eyes. What happened to you? She asked. You smell different? You smell like ... double quotes. Like what? What? Like a hunter, she whispered. Jake helped the children gather their few belongings. As they prepared to leave the chamber, the youngest of them, one of the human children, tugged on his sleeve. Are the monsters all gone? The child asked Jake, looked down at the scared little face, and felt something warm in his chest. Yes, he said gently. The monsters are all gone. You're safe now. As they began the long journey back to the surface, Jake carried the smallest children when they got tired. He checked every tunnel junction, every dark corner, making sure no threats remained. The children followed him without question, trusting completely in their protector. They didn't know that the most dangerous predator in the entire cave system was walking right in front of them, keeping them safe. Above ground, the Cathara crew was monitoring Jake's beacon signal as it moved slowly through the cave system. Commander Zektar watched the display with growing amazement. How many Zelthic has he eliminated? Belkin asked, staring at the readings. According to our sensors, at least 8 confirmed kills, the sensor officer reported. Possibly more. Bridge fell silent. 8 Zelthic would have been a challenge for a full squad of Cathara warriors in open combat. A single, unarmed human had eliminated them in their own territory. Commander, the communications officer, said quietly, I'm receiving a signal from the human. He says he's bringing up 7 survivors. Zektar's eyes widened. Not only had the small human survived his mission, he had actually succeeded in rescuing the children. Prepare a medical team, the commander ordered, and prepare to receive our hunting party. As Jake led the children through the final tunnel toward the surface, he could see light ahead. Real light, not from his small torch, but from the Cathara ship's landing lights. They were almost home. The children started crying with relief when they saw the light. Some of them ran ahead, eager to escape the darkness that had held them prisoner. But they all looked back to make sure Jake was following them. He was their protector now. He was the one who had saved them from the monsters, and deep in the caves behind them. The Zelthic pack that had terrorized Mining Colony 7 was nothing but silent corpses, defeated by a human they had never seen coming. Jake emerged from the cave entrance carrying the smallest child in his arms. The other 6 children followed closely behind him, staying near their protector even though they could see the safety of the Cathara ship ahead. The entire crew of the Starforge was waiting for them. Commander Zektar stood at the front of the group, his yellow eyes fixed on the small human who had just accomplished the impossible. Behind him, dozens of Cathara warriors watched in complete silence. Jake looked different from the frightened maintenance worker who had gone into the cave 6 hours earlier. His clothes were torn and stained with dark liquid that the Cathara recognized as Zelthic blood. His hair was dirty and his face was scratched, but his eyes held a new kind of confidence. He moved like someone who had faced death and won. The children ran to the medical team that was waiting for them. The Cathara doctors quickly began checking them for injuries, but they kept looking back at Jake to make sure he was still there. The youngest human child refused to let go of his hand. It's okay, Jake told her gently. The doctors are going to take good care of you now. You're safe. Only when the child was safely in the arms of a medical officer did Jake turn to face Commander Zektar. The two of them stared at each other for a long moment. The entire crew waited to see what would happen next. Zektar walked slowly toward Jake. With each step, the silence grew deeper. When he was close enough to touch the human, the massive alien commander did something that shocked everyone present. He knelt down on one knee, bringing his eyes level with Jake's. I see you now, little brother, Zektar said in the ancient ritual. Language of the Cathara. The hunt has revealed your true nature. The gasps from the crew were audible. In Cathara culture, the title brother was only given to proven warriors who had earned respect through combat. It was the highest honor one Cathara could give to another, but this was more than just respect. Commander Zektar, one of the most decorated warriors in the Cathara fleet, was acknowledging that a human had proven himself worthy of brotherhood. Jake didn't fully understand the significance of the words, but he could see the shock on the faces of the crew around him. I just did what needed to be done, he said quietly. No, Zektar replied, rising to his full height. You did what a true hunter does. You protected the young. You eliminated the threat. You brought them all home safely. He paused, studying Jake's face. How many Zelthic did you kill? I stopped. Counting after 8, Jake admitted.
There might have been more.
The crew's clicking sounds filled the air, but this time they weren't laughing. They were expressing amazement and approval. Sub-Commander Velkin stepped forward, the same warrior who had mocked Jake just days earlier. Little brother, Velkin said formally, I ask your forgiveness for my earlier words. I did not see your true nature. Jake was surprised by the apology. You didn't know, he said simply. I didn't know either. Lisa and Tony pushed through the crowd of aliens to reach their friend. Lisa hugged him tightly, tears in her eyes. We were so worried, she said. We thought we might never see you again. I'm okay, Jake assured her, though he still felt strange about everything that had happened in the caves. Something fundamental had changed inside him, and he wasn't sure what it meant. Over the next few hours, as the medical team finished treating the rescued children, Jake found himself treated very differently by the Cathara crew. Warriors who had ignored him before now nodded respectfully when they saw him. Officers who had dismissed his opinions now asked for his thoughts on tactical matters. The change was most obvious at dinner time. When Jake entered the dining hall, conversation stopped, but instead of the mocking silence he was used to, this was respectful attention. Velkin stood up and gestured to an empty seat at the officer's table. Brother Jake, he said formally, would you honor us by sharing the evening meal? Jake looked around the room in amazement. The officer's table was where only the senior warriors sat. It was a place of honor that he had never even dreamed of accessing. I would be honored, Jake replied, trying to match the formal tone as he sat down among the Cathara officers. Jake noticed that they were all looking at him with something he had never seen before: respect. Commander Zektar raised his drinking cup in a toast. To Brother Jake, he announced to the room, has shown us that true strength comes in many forms. The entire dining hall erupted in the Cathara battle cry, a sound that Jake had only heard. During combat drills, it was their way of honoring a proven warrior. Over dinner, the officers asked Jake to describe what had happened in the caves. As he told his story, the Cathara listened with intense interest. They wanted to know how he had tracked the Zelthic, how he had used the cave system to his advantage, and how he had defeated creatures that even experienced warriors found challenging. The Zelthic rely on fear and confusion, Jake explained. They expect their prey to panic and make mistakes, but humans are different. When we're protecting something important, we don't panic. We get angry. Anger can be a powerful weapon, agreed the ship's weapons master. But anger without skill is useless. You showed great tactical intelligence in those caves. Jake thought about this. I grew up in a dangerous place on Earth, he said slowly. I learned how to deal with predators when I was very young. The Zelthic were just bigger predators. Interesting. Zektar mused. Perhaps that is why humans are so adaptable. You learn to hunt the hunters. After dinner, Velkin approached Jake privately. Brother, he said, I have a request. Would you be willing to train with our younger warriors? They could learn much from your unconventional methods. Jake was stunned. You want me to teach Cathara? Warriors. I want you to teach them to think like you, Velkin corrected. Act. In the caves, you used tactics that none of us would have considered. You turned your weaknesses into strengths. The kind of thinking could save lives. Word of Jake's success spread quickly through the ship. The next morning, he found a group of junior officers waiting outside his quarters. They wanted to hear about human fighting techniques and how he had adapted them to work against alien threats. Jake found himself conducting impromptu training sessions in the ship's gymnasium. He taught the young Cathara how to use their environment as a weapon, how to read their enemies' behavior patterns, and how to think creatively during combat. The most surprising student was Commander Zektar himself. The veteran warrior attended every session, asking thoughtful questions about human tactical philosophy. Your species thinks differently than ours, Zektar observed one day. We rely on strength and honor. You rely on adaptability and intelligence. Both approaches have value. Maybe that's why the Galactic Defense Coalition wanted mixed crews. Jake suggested, different species bring different strengths. A week later, Jake received new orders from Earth Command. He was being promoted to Tactical Advisor and assigned permanently to the Starforge. His mission would be to help develop new combat strategies that combined human creativity with Cathara warrior traditions. The promotion ceremony was held in the ship's main bay, the entire crew present. Commander Zektar personally pinned the new rank insignia on Jake's uniform. From this day forward, Zektar announced, Jake Morrison serves as our strategic hunting advisor. He will help us learn to see our enemies through human eyes. As the ceremony ended, Jake looked around at the faces of his crewmates. These aliens who had once mocked his small size now looked at him with genuine respect and admiration. He had found his place among them not by becoming like them, but by showing them what humans could offer. That evening, Jake stood in the ship's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Lisa joined him, smiling at her transformed friend. "So how does it feel to be the ship's official apex predator?" she asked teasingly. Jake laughed. "I'm not an apex predator," he said. "I'm just a human who figured out how to use what makes us different." And what makes us different? Jake thought about the children he had saved, the Zelthic he had defeated, and the respect he had earned from the galaxy's fiercest warriors. "We adapt," he said finally. "No matter what the universe throws at us, we find a way to survive and protect what matters to us." Outside the observation window, the stars continued their ancient dance, and somewhere among them, other humans were serving on alien ships, slowly proving that humanity belonged among the stars, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were something far more dangerous. They were survivors, who had learned to hunt anything that threatened their pack, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that when you mocked a human, you might just wake up something you weren't prepared to face.